The Talmud and the Scholar is made possible by the Nash Family Foundation, the L. Bravman Family Foundation, the Smith and Kogod families, Alvin H. Einbender, and Mr. and Mrs. Robert Sheridan.
The scholar is Adin Steinsaltz, born in Jerusalem in 1937. Scholar, writer, religious leader. The rabbi who worked with Soviet authorities to create the new yeshiva in Moscow, the first school for Talmud study in Russia since the revolution. But his life's work is the Talmud, creating the Steinsaltz edition, which features a commentary in modern language with maps, pictures, historical background, all integrated with traditional texts. His goal? To make it possible for people without extensive backgrounds to participate in the study of the Talmud.
I would put it in a kind of a sentence. I would say that the Bible is one part of the dialogue. It's God speaking to man. The Talmud is the other part of the dialogue, man speaking to God. And if we want to have a conversation, obviously there need to be two parties. And obviously the two parties don't speak in the same voice at all.
The Talmud is a collection of the wisdom and the culture of the Jewish people going back more than 1,000 years. The Talmud records debates among great teachers that took place over many generations, discussions about law and about the very human problems of everyday life. Reading it aloud with a partner is the way the Talmud has always been studied.
Two separate, even if you hold 2 hours, it's still going to be chayiv to Malchus. But according to Ramban, it's very good, right? Because according to them, you hold, even if it's 2 hours, you're still going to be chayiv 2 separate 2 Malchus.
Well, a book, when it is on the shelf, can do very little. Even the holiest of books is not very helpful when it is on the shelf. A book that is being read, and as the Talmud is not only being read, you cannot really read it. It is possibly, unfortunately, it is not reading material. It is a material, not because the subject matter is tough. That's a part of it, but not all of it. The main thing is that studying it means interacting. That is the kind that you have to interact with. You cannot just read it only as a passive listener.
Somebody who injures his friend is responsible to pay 5 different things, 5 components of the damage payment.
What these two rabbis are studying is the section of the Talmud dealing with personal injury. They start with a statement of laws, called a Mishnah, which outlines the monetary responsibilities of the guilty person.
Rehabilitated him, health.
Am I?
Okay, read the Gemara.
Why?
Yeah, why?
Why?
But as the students come to the commentary section, called the Gemara, they are faced with a very tough question.
Right? Because the Torah says, Ein tachas ein, an eye for an eye, Omer Achmona. Torah said an eye for an eye.
Right, so the verse in the Torah is Ein tachas ein, end quote.
Right.
Ein tachas ein, Amar Achmana, yeah.
Right? Asks the Gemara, Ema ein mamish. If it says an eye for an eye, why don't you say it's really an eye? Actual eye. If you took out the guy's eye, you've got to take out this guy's eye.
Why, the Gemara asks, should we be talking about money in the first place? Doesn't the Bible clearly say, ayin tachas ayin, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth? Isn't that the biblical response to personal injury?
It means an actual eye.
The Gemara then goes through several kinds of arguments using linguistics and logic to prove that monetary compensation was always implied in the Bible. One goes that if an eye for an eye is taken literally, then it would be impossible to have equal justice for everybody, which the Bible requires.
Is that you have to pay money. Maybe it really doesn't mean that. Maybe it means that the Torah really meant that you have to take out his eye. It can't mean that. Torah never could have meant that. Harei shahaya suma. I'll give you an example. Harei shahaya suma, if the person was blind, Vesima, and he blinded somebody else. Kitea vekitea, and he was missing the limb.
Yeah.
And he cut off somebody's limb. Chiger v'chiger, or he made someone lame. Right?
Yeah, he's a lame person himself, and he made someone else lame.
So how can you effect this punishment on him? He already is suffering from this thing that he did to his friend. And it has to be equal for everybody. So therefore, what do we deduce? We deduce that it has to be money.
Right, because otherwise we wouldn't need any punishment.
Will get away with nothing.
Right.
And the Torah said that justice means that everybody has to get the same law applied to them. My kushya, but really, what's the problem?
But one question remains. If eye for an eye always meant monetary compensation, then why didn't the Bible say so in the first place? One possible answer is that the graphic language of the biblical verse offers a stark moral statement, that a person who injures another is deeply and personally responsible.
In other words, it shows that even the first time they didn't really, that Yaseh has
There's
to
no
be
limit
interpreted
to
this
how
way.
far our students can go with this piece of Talmud, or just how many times they will do it over
Right.
again.
So now what about our other question?
Just as a chess fan replays the moves of a famous match. Not to see who wins, he already knows that, but to appreciate the meaning encoded in the moves. Moves best understood by someone who has played them out for himself.
In other words, since they use that,
So I think that there is a very great need for the Talmud in many aspects. And as I explained many times, that is, in many ways, the book is the backbone of Judaism.
To understand the Talmud, you first have to understand the importance of the Torah, the Bible, in the history of the Jewish people. "19 centuries ago, the Jews were already an ancient people with a tradition that long predated their Greek and Roman contemporaries. By that time, the Sumerians had disappeared. The Philistines, the Canaanites, the Phoenicians were gone, but the Jews remained. Though conquered by Assyria and exiled by Babylon, repatriated by Persia, and conquered again by Greece and then by Rome, the Jews continued to cling to their way of life. A way of life that revolved around study. The focus of the study was the Torah, sometimes translated as the law, though the teachings would be more accurate.
That it is not just that the law is divinely revealed, but the law is divinity in itself. This in itself is a divine service. You see, learning is not a process of acquiring knowledge. Learning the Torah is in itself a service. It is a ritual, in a way.
ברוך הוא עושה שלום כל שכן בעולם הזה. שלום למעלה לא היה צריך. לא היה צריך בין המלאכים. הקדוש ברוך הוא עושה שלום בתורה, כבד את אביך ואת אמך.
Old, young, rich, poor, slow, gifted, everyone was commanded to study the Torah, what the world today calls the first 5 books of the Bible. Along with this written Torah, the Jews believed that God also revealed unwritten oral law to Moses on Mount Sinai. Joined together, the written and oral teachings told how God wanted man to live.
There was the oral law, and the oral law existed. In fact, it had to exist as long as there was a written law. I mean, because the oral law is always what you understand about the law. No law is really detailed enough to explain what you mean when you say something. So usually you have a structure which explains what you mean, and that is the real basis for the oral law.
So besides the written Torah, the Jews studied oral law and commentaries. They called it learning, or Talmud. It included virtually everything that could concern a human being, from philosophy to the relationship between the sexes, from history to mysticism, politics, ethics, aesthetics, the natural world, and on and on.
האדם הזה, אומר רב הונא, המקיס דם בבימת קודשים, אסור בהנאה ומועלים בו.
The Talmud had to deal with every issue because the Jews believed in one God who fills all existence, and therefore no subject, no matter how mundane, could be ignored in trying to figure out God's intentions. That's why the Talmud is so concrete, and that's why its study is characterized by painstaking detail and argument.
דבר טבעי שתהיה באגם עם שומר.
אבל אם היא מתה מחמת הבלה, זה לא שישייך שומר ולהבלה.
Each one is shouting at the other one, wants to prove his point, but it's not in order to prove my point. If I really believe that this is the way to read the Gemara, I've got to fight for this is very important. These are the words of God, and you can't distort. My understanding is that this is what God meant. I think the Talmud itself says that whoever learns without singing, his learning isn't worth very much. The singing puts the words of the Gemara into your soul. With a partner, it's harder to go wrong. When you learn yourself, you can go off the track and you really don't know where you'll end up. When you're two people, keep tabs on each other, and you help each other, you ask each other questions, you challenge each other's understanding, and you've got to answer for what you're saying, and if you can't answer, you've got to find different way to explain.
The ancient houses of study were filled with sound. They had to be because most of what was being studied was an oral tradition, and audible repetition was the only way to remember it. The Jews clearly understood that if the oral teachings were written down, their entire communal system might collapse. As long as the only way to pass down the teachings was from master to student, from generation to generation, then the oral teachings would always be vital, the lifeblood of the people. By the 2nd century, the Jews were the only nation still in revolt against the Roman Empire. The temple, the center of Jewish life, had been destroyed. Several rebellions left hundreds of thousands dead. Finally, Emperor Hadrian decided the only way to subdue this stubborn people was to ban their study and execute their teachers.
After the big revolt that ended with the destruction of the temple in the year 70, after the second revolt of Bar Kokhba that was ended in the year 135 and was disastrous. I mean, when you see all these areas here, in a strange way, the land has been destroyed in such a way that it didn't recover in the last 2,000 years. It's no joke. I mean, all the land of what are called Judea has been destroyed. There is an estimate of about 1 million people killed in this area, which is an enormous number of people. And at the end, the mainstay of Jewish population moved to the Galilee.
North of Jerusalem, in the Galilee region, the Jews continued to study. But now they faced a terrible paradox. With exile inevitable, they had to record the teachings or lose them forever. But writing them down would risk the vitality of the oral teachings and the basis of the Jewish way of life. What could they do? What they did was to create a tool to ensure their survival as a people, a precision tool for shaping the continuity of their culture. Over several centuries, they compiled the Talmud in the learning academies of Palestine and Babylon. Inventing a way to record their tradition in writing without losing the advantages of oral culture. So even though the Talmud is written, the student is commanded to say its words aloud, preferably in a loud voice, with a melody, and when possible with a partner or a teacher. So the text becomes a script, and studying it aloud becomes performance. And the Talmud, without an active reader, is no more a finished book than a blueprint is a house, or a roadmap, a journey. In time, the Talmud became synonymous with Jewish life, anchoring, preserving it for 15 centuries, despite the Jewish exile throughout the world. But today, very few Jews still study the Talmud. Why?
You have to remember that most of the Jewish communities in our time are not living anywhere near the places where their parents were born or their grandfathers were born. I mean, this upheaval, and comparatively speaking, a very short time, and sometimes in a violent form, and at least 2 world wars, some more mass migrations. Now, they destroyed the fabric of life, of Jewish life, in every aspect. So they destroyed, of course, easier things that are more delicate. That is, these are the first things to be destroyed. The fine threads, as important as they are of a culture, are lost first.
Okay, so how many are many? That is, so you mean to make it public? To make it a public? When we speak about what I call a public...
There have been members of this group who are, in addition to physicists, there have been sociologists, there has been a Jungian analyst, and it appears that in each particular profession, he can direct himself almost into a private dialogue beyond the capacity of many of us to understand.
Enormous weight. Yes, of course.
He is the most widely read, broadly educated, sometimes self-educated person that I've ever met.
Now this, in a place, so it goes in Suffolk.
Rabbi Steinsaltz had an office, a little office in this building at one time. This is all 10 years ago, more than 10 years ago. And I wanted to explain to him that I wasn't a religious man seeking for religious guidance like one normally goes to the rabbi. And I said, Rabbi Steinsaltz, I'm terribly sorry. I am not religious. As a matter of fact, I eat bacon on Shabbos. And he said, only on Shabbos? I said, yes, only on Shabbos. He said, why only on Shabbos? I said, during the week, I just gulp down a cup of coffee and a bit of bread, because I got to go to work. He said, only on Shabbos. He says, well, look, the Bible teaches us that we have to honor the Shabbos. I wouldn't do it that way, but if you do it with bacon, it's better than not honoring the Shabbos. I thought it was a marvelous...
So he's relaxed with secular people?
He is, because he has got deep religious understanding and also a good secular education.
If I'm quoting to you as an authority the Shulchan Aruch, and you are quoting against me Sigmund Freud, we really cannot have any discussion. I mean, we cannot have any discussion. That's a closed circle. I mean,
Do you think what you find in the Talmud is relevant today?
People don't quote Sigmund Freud.
We spent recently about a month discussing the obligations of somebody who hires a donkey to bring wood up a mountain. And the man uses the donkey to bring it down the mountain. The donkey breaks a leg. Whose responsibility is this? Now, all this you can find on the back of the Avis hire contract, so we can do without that. But still, it's interesting to see how they did this at the time.
Well, when you talk in the Talmud, say, about something like damages done by animals, I mean, all these things are in the Talmud, they are dealt something specifically, donkey, sheep, so on. But they have nothing to do with these particular items. The concrete example is used as a help to deal with a problem, with a subject. But when you really have to understand it, it means that you have to deal with the principles. It is dealing with a search for truth. I would say reality is shifting, truth is not.
The distinctive shape of a typical page of Talmud shows how it is studied. The starting point is a piece of the oral tradition called Mishnah, which means repetition. Compiled by Rabbi Yehuda the Prince during the early days of the Roman Empire, it is written in a very condensed Hebrew that tries to organize the written law found in the first 5 books of the Bible. But over time, the Mishnah itself became the subject for debate in the Gemara, compiled by Rav Ashi in Babylon during the early Christian period. The Gemara, or finishing, was written in the Aramaic language of that time. As time went on, even the Gemara's explanations needed commentary. The most famous is Rashi. Rashi was an 11th century scholar living in the south of medieval France who created the definitive commentary, startling in its precision and clarity. Of course, Rashi's commentary generated new questions, and these were addressed by the Tosafot, a group of scholars living in France, Germany, and Italy between the 11th and 13th centuries. Their encyclopedic knowledge of the Talmud sends the reader from the page in front of him to a relevant passage hundreds of pages away. Later on, errors made by printers created confusion, so in the Bayit Chadash, Rabbi Yoel Sirkis, living in 18th century Poland, tried to straighten things out in his commentary. Then there are others, like Rabbeinu Hananel, who lived in North Africa in the 10th century. There was so little space left that his words had to be squeezed into the margins. Soon new reference tools were added to help the student, but this left no room for dozens of other masters who had to be printed in the back of the book. Read together, these texts make up a running, sometimes fierce debate in which men who lived in different continents and in different eras were literally able to annihilate the boundaries of time and space.
We received the material from the Hebrew edition of the Steinsaltz Talmud, and we are beginning the process of bringing that into an English version. Here, you have the standard format of the Talmud page. That's the framework within which Rav Steinsaltz had to work to produce his new version. Here we have the new version. These 2 pages correspond to 1 page of the original text. Here you have a punctuated version and a version commented on in modern Hebrew on the outside. Rashi is still here in the middle, and Tosfot are here underneath. His own, Rabbi Steinsaltz's own additional insights and extra material are published at the bottom or on the sides of the page. Here we have the English version, and what you have again is Hebrew Aramaic text in the middle, a literal translation of the text, and Rav Steinsaltz's commentary translated into English on this side. Rabbi Steinsaltz, in his Hebrew edition, has opened the Talmud up to the Hebrew-speaking world. He wants by this to help to open it up to the English-speaking world. And bear in mind that we're talking about a major work of world literature, a work that has influenced Judaism almost to the degree that the Bible has.
Can the Talmud ever again be as important as it once was when every male Jew was expected to study it?
That's a very difficult question. I think that the aim is to make the material accessible. By doing that, you create the market to use the material. At the same time, there seems to be a strong thrust of young people who previously were not interested in their Jewish roots, who realized that the Talmud and the study of the Talmud, apart from being an intellectual exercise of the first magnitude, is also a way of understanding the traditions and history of their people.
It's pretty basic. I mean, once I determined that Judaism was the truth. So after that, the Talmud is basically the essence of Judaism, where everything comes from. So in order to really understand Judaism and to live a Jewish life, you have to know how to learn Talmud. I mean, it's as basic as that. So that's what I've been doing over the last year, trying to learn how to learn Talmud, which is not an easy task.
I was a practicing lawyer in Philadelphia for 28 years. Well, I still have memories of what it was like to practice law, and to be sure what I was before still remains with me. There's a new dimension now. The new dimension is that I am now expanding my knowledge, my horizons, my understanding, my sensitivity by getting involved in these studies, because these studies touch on all aspects of life. So I'm really, in some sense, starting again. Now, I have here a young man of 20 who has been studying for a year and a half, and just a few moments ago, he was correcting me. So you see, that's the situation.
How did you come to be here?
After I finished high school, I decided to come for a year in Israel to actually have a good time, but didn't plan on spending it learning in yeshiva, but I ended up liking it after a few months, and I ended up staying a year and a half.
A full year is this thing over here. This is called a full year. Because a full year goes around.
So if you have the right teachers and you realize that you're learning out principles, and they can lift the principles out of the page, so then they make it make sense, by learning out the principles. But if you get stuck in all the words and you're stuck in that, it could be a big problem. You have to learn, it's just, so it's different cases than if you went to law school. They have more modern cases. So we have more old-fashioned cases, but it's all principles. And you have to have the right teacher that can bring those out.
So Allah tell the Yolam, be'emetz it's a machlokes in the Rishonim. Some Rishonim hold that it's a machlokes in the two sugis HaGemara. The Gemara is a kasha. How do you know? The Gemara says, how do you know the pasuk of Habasa asher yiga b'chol tamei lo ya'ochel. You're not allowed to eat it. The basa that became tamei. It's an extra pasuk. Maybe it comes for an extra lav. That's what the Gemara asks. Maybe it's an extra lav. An extra lav? How do you know the Torah gives you 2 lavin? You're fine by Patisa. You give 2 lavin. No, Patisa is not a raya. Yeah. Okay. What would you say, Elkanah?
You said that you serve because otherwise you don't have the ride that the 5 malchus on. It's lash b'cholos.
Taisis, Rabbi say. You forgot the Taisis. Who was first? Okay, Motcha. We'll see what.
How many hours a day do you study Talmud?
I would say about 12.
12 hours a day?
Yeah. Maybe a little more. Right? So the Gemara's kasha is, why shouldn't it be 2 lavin? And the Gemara answered that kasha.
Truthfully, does it ever get tiresome?
Do you mean the teaching gets tiresome? Well, we hope when the students are good, I love it.
And same with everybody say now, but I have something wrong because I learned that wasn't what I was learning.
Who's got a favorite television show?
We don't have television.
No television's there.
We don't have television.
No television's there. They don't allow television. No tape recorders.
No radios.
They stick to the Talmud and all the other everything we learn.
Who's got a favorite rock group?
We don't listen to rock. We have special Jewish music and other things like that.
Mordechai ben David. There are other Jewish rock, not really rock stars, but other Jewish singers who make tapes also, and we listen to them.
Who's got a favorite sports team?
Okay,
Mets.
now we're talking.
Mets, baseball. Now the Lakers and the Pistons are in, but
Yankees are going to get it this year.
Well, the reason why I'm asking you all these questions is I'm wondering if you ever feel alienated from all the other people who are in America.
The point of Judaism is like to be separated from the other religions of the world. So in studying the Talmud and basing our conduct on that, we sort of make ourselves like Jewish.
Somewhere in the Talmud it says that there are certain sins that are easier forgiven, and those are the sins that people commit according to their ages. So if a young man chases women and an old man chases money, that can be forgiven, but not the other way around.
A rabbi's life is filled with more than study. This is true even when he is a great scholar like Adin Steinsaltz.
Perhaps the most important things or the most beautiful things about a wedding are said in the blessings, the 7 blessings of the wedding. Every couple is compared to Adam and Eve in paradise. It's a nice idea.
Shalom.
My daughter, who is 22, is called Esther, very independent lady. And I would say that possibly my favorite, even though she doesn't think so. And now my middle son is called Menachem. He is now about 14 and something.
Oh, I think that still he enjoys far more playing than study. Now, my youngest, who has 4 names, just called abbreviation, Amichaye, all my children have reasonably good brains. What they will do with them is just a matter of time. My wife, if she would do my job, she would enjoy it much more. She likes traveling much more than I do. And she likes people far more. Basically, I'm a loner. One of the family traits, very few common things, is possibly that we are all addicted to chocolate. We eat chocolate like other people eat bread, I'm afraid. Israel is a country that is accustomed to violence. I would say that my first memory, a bomb exploding, I'm in a baby carriage, and my mother is running with a baby carriage with me. You can decide either to die of fright or to survive without being extremely frightened.
Most of the Zionists who founded Israel renounced their religion and focused all their secular passion on building a state for the here and now. The Steinsaltz family was among them.
Many of them were socialists, and the books of Marx were in our home. It was a part of the world, of I would call of yesterday. I want to see myself as a part of the world of tomorrow. So they were the world of yesterday was a Marxist, irreligious world. And the founders of this state were parts of an overall, I would say, phenomenon. First of all, my father, at some time in his life, was possibly extremely left-wing. For all of this, he was extremely proud Jew. I was then about 10 or so. He took a private teacher to teach me Talmud. And he said something which I never forgot. I mean, he says, I don't care if you become an atheist, but I don't want any child of mine to be an ignoramus.
Today, Prime Minister Shamir called for calm between secular and religious people. He asked them to look for a way to communicate with some understanding.
The religious people don't serve in the army. They don't work. How are they useful to the country? If they'd listened to me, they'd send them back to Europe.
This struggle isn't just about Jerusalem. It's about the character and nature of all Israel.
See, the state of Israel, in a way, is torn between two basic attitudes. In one of these, this is a Jewish state. The other one, it is a state of Jews. Now, there's a vast difference between those two aspects. And that is a real, the state of Israel is now not in the teens, but still has an identity crisis.
The religious people just don't like the way we secular people behave.
It disturbs me. As long as they believe in God and live their own lives, that's fine with me. But when they try to force their ways of behaving and thinking on me, that disturbs me.
See, sometimes the definition of who is broad-minded and who is not sometimes depend on what breadth it is of my mind. See, if I know the names of all the, say, the last 10 films that were hits somewhere, I may be considered broad-minded in some circles. For others, it seems just, let's say, perhaps my grandfather would say, narishkeit, just nonsense, stupidity. I mean, only a child would be interested in that, even not a clever child. Now, if you know, for example, all kinds of, say, of the 24, or say 24 books of the Bible by heart, or if you know what is the list of names of all the 39 prohibited kinds of work on Shabbat, that is something important. Now, other people may not think so. So, in many ways, it is misleading because it is a different perspective. See, our culture, Jewish culture, is a different culture. It's not a Western culture. We are between the way of thinking of the West and the Far East. And we combine elements of both. But we are a very distinctive culture. It's a very distinctive way of looking at things. See, Jews were always far more interested not in the how of things, but in the why. The question of purpose really comes from the Jewish thinking that the world can be better than it is today. That is a very essential point, that you can make things better, that they don't have necessarily to be worse. And that is, as again, it is very unsettling for every society. You don't really look behind you to see what happened, but you are trying to see what may be happening. As I said, where are you going to? So that is basically our main contribution. Our main contribution, if you would put it, is we basically added the dimension of future into the human mind.
Russia. Before the revolution, it was one of the leading centers of Talmud study in the world. 70 years later, most of the 2 million Jews in the Soviet Union have never even seen a Talmud. In a startling about-face, Soviet authorities have recently allowed Rabbi Steinsaltz to open a new yeshiva, a school for Talmud studies, right in Moscow.
We started on a dark, snowy night, and we were all tired from traveling 24 hours, and Rabbi Steinsaltz was the only one there who wasn't tired, and he was ready to go. And the first thing he said on our first night in Moscow was, remember, we have nothing to hide here. One can assume that everything that we do is known, and that's wonderful, because we have absolutely nothing to hide. We have no secrets.
בודקים שלא יעבור עליו ובל יראה בל ימצא. אם אמצא לך בל יראה בל ימצא.
I remember an exchange with a young man, and he told me, I mean a young man who on his own found his being Jewish, his Jewishness, his Jewish knowledge. And he said to me, I mean, my coming there, I mean, officially, with all the trappings, I mean, he said, your coming here is a marvel, it's a miracle. I said, you being here is a much larger miracle. See, in a way but the fact that it is the same kind of but historically significant. You have a tree that has been cut to the roots, and there are new shoots growing up. It's a marvelous experience.
The young men of the yeshiva, mostly in their 20s, stood around him. There wasn't a dry eye in the place. And then he said, come, let us sit and study. And this man, whose breadth, not just of Torah knowledge, but of secular knowledge is so vast, whose familiarity with the sea of Talmud and every area of Jewish learning is so vast as to be frightening, sat down and with these young men began to open up the last chapter in the tractate Pesachim of the Babylonian Talmud that deals with the laws of Passover. And like a young teacher sitting with initiate students with love and kindness, began to read Alvei Psachim, word after word, and the greatness of his scholarship and erudition did not in any way affect his ability to teach Hatchalat Gemara, elementary Talmud. And one could see between him and the students develop that kind of intimate bond that develops only in the intimacy of love between teacher and student.
I'm wondering, this could sound very naive, but I'll ask anyway. Is your calling from God?
I hope so. I really hope so. But you see, our people, Jews, we are such hard-headed people, with all whatever anybody may think. Very, very obstinate. It's possibly one of the hallmarks of our being. Very obstinate people, not easy to change. And those that are truly, typical, are those that will hear very few voices. That is, in a way, if I would put it possibly in a most chauvinistic way, we, in a certain way, we don't need them. We don't need them. You see, this description of Jews as being children unto the Lord. That means that we don't need any kind of especially enlisting us to be on his side or calling us. We anyway belong. When one thinks about God as some kind of a Santa Claus living about 1,000 miles upwards in the heaven, then there is a big problem about finding evidence for his existence. I mean, I would say that the God that many people are searching for doesn't exist at all. I mean, that's what I call that childish image of the man with the long beard that holds, say, a sweet in one hand and a stick in the other hand, sitting there waiting for me to see if I can be punished by somehow or rewarded by somehow. I mean, when you are searching for such images, there is not much evidence for them in any world, not in ours and not in any other world. We are always fighting against time. And fighting against time means that a day lost, an hour lost is irreplaceable. You know that we are, in many places, we are an endangered species. We are the sons of Isaac, and that is our model. Go on, continue. You have problems, a brother problem, a son problem, a wife problem, go on. You have suffering, go on. You are blind, go on.
If I see you to because he's going to have a piece from the Rebbe in there too.
Yes.
So anyway.
Did you want to stay for lunch? You're welcome.
No. What do you? If you can, you see, the only problem that I have continuously is the problem how to get a little bit of time.
Right.
You see, so if I can flee. That is the biggest joy that you can give me is just allow me to get out. Usually I sleep sometimes. I don't have too many chances of doing it properly, but I rather like it. I mean, as a hobby.
The success of your mission, how will it be judged, do you think?
Well, success of something like this, what one called it, in God's eyes, that is in the Psalms, in God's eyes, and 1,000 years are like a day for you. In a way, we identify, it's really mitat yodei, we identify, and in our history, in our view, 1,000 years are like a day. To really evaluate something, we need a few hours. I used to come here into the zoo when I saw too many people. Okay? You know, I always wondered why the lion is called the king of beasts. One of the things is clear. It's one of the laziest animals, real lazy animal. You can see they are sitting here and they rest. I would say that they are almost like people. They have just beautiful, sad eyes. See, when you take the point of view, say, of the antelope, then the tiger is just the enemy. When you take the point of view of the tiger, then the antelope is just breakfast. And to find somehow in between how they can be worked together, those 2 points of view. One of the real stories is about that when God said, let us create man, he really asked the whole universe, let us create man. And so each of the creatures in the world, the fox and the bear and the tiger, each contributed a part. And when you take all of it together, then you have man, which is a kind of a composition of everything in the world. In a way, animals are simple things, one melody of a kind. And then you have human beings are a symphony, and sometimes it's not played well. Some people have their life is what I call external adventures. And in such a life, I mean, when you tell, climbed a mountain, I almost fell, I killed a lion. I mean, all these things are exciting as happenings. Now, what did you think when you killed a lion? Possibly nothing. Now in some other people have other realms of life. What really happens is in a different area. It's a marvelous one, and all kinds of things happen. Just had a new idea. I discovered something new. There is a way of looking at things. There is a way of finding out. But that is a different adventure, possibly a more exciting one.
The Talmud and the Scholar was made possible by the Nash Family Foundation, the L. Bravman Family Foundation, the Smith and Kogod families, Alvin H. Einbender, and Mr. and Mrs. Robert Sheridan.